locks out government from the ability to manipulate said banking system. And that's true of the money supply, that's true of savings, and of the rest of it. Now, just to my first point again, so it's true, I bank with a credit union, but that's not to say that that's totally safe either. The fact of the matter is there is just uncertainty at present in the market that has been generated by the federal government. So I believe it forces us to push all the harder for independence as soon as we can so that this threat can be eliminated.
I just add to that the same thing would hold for any bank that whose head office emanates in Alberta would be completely controlled within Alberta. There would be no former federal government that would interfere. And if Alberta was an independent nation within Canada, same thing holds. So what Tanner has proposed in terms of that Alberta Sovereignty Act is to protect individual depositors and investors from the federal government and CRA.
This next index card has three things on it. What percentage of this room are Calgary residents? Please raise your hands. Oh wow, perfect. That's great.
Sorry about the Oilers.
Yeah. The thickest statute in the world is the Canadian Income Tax Act, and this is from an ex-Revenue Canada agent. Arriving at taxable income enables endless surveillance, corruption, and coercion. Can we look to ending this tax in Alberta? Would this make Alberta more attractive?
Yeah, absolutely. None of that would occur. Remember, what we're advocating is freedom of mind, freedom of markets, small government, and far less regulation. So small government means there isn't funding for that kind of nonsense, that kind of surveillance. And it would be just simply a non-starter in terms of what we're advocating for the next government, that you can all help drive home that message. We don't want that surveillance. We don't want to be pinned, cataloged, categorized, tracked, and controlled. We don't want that, and it's not going to happen.
Do you plan on making the provincial how do you plan on making the provincial government accountable?
Well, Tanner touched on this already, but just to put it in sharp focus, when you look at the policies and the bylaws, the bylaws primarily of every party, you will not find bylaws that are robust in any way, shape, or form that will hold an elected official accountable. It doesn't exist. It's not there at all. If you look at what we're proposing for bylaws for the party in power, then you will see that they are compelled to be not only responsible in terms of enacting what you want in terms of the protection of your interests, your freedoms, your prosperity, but they will be held accountable through virtually instant recall. So this is why elected officials don't want this, is because they don't want to be held accountable. Now, if for example, Chris was the premier, Chris would want to be held accountable because he believes in what you want, in supporting what you want. I mean, this is the way government should be accountable, and right now it's simply not. Another thing to think about in this context as well is the Referendum Act. The Referendum Act, which is part of the proposal for the Alberta Sovereignty Act, permits citizens to have a referendum, for example, on any spending bill that will raise taxes. So if they're, a municipality or any city wants to raise taxes for any reason on property owners, and we want to get rid of that anyhow. So in other words, it might be on income tax. You can get rid of that or prevent that from occurring by having a referendum. Now, if people want to have support a project and they want to pay it through their taxes, then it's a one-time affair. As soon as the project's done, then your taxes go right back down to that 10% level. So, I mean, these are some of the things that, you know, in terms of keeping elected officials accountable, that's what we would be advocating.
I've got something. Imagine I have something to say. Yeah.
So one other thing, if you want to keep elected officials accountable, how about you build an organization like the APP with so many members that when the government does something egregious, or when they lock down a restaurant or do something that's blatantly not in our best interest, how about we have an organization so big and we can mobilize it so fast that we can fire, you're doing that on purpose, aren't you? That we can fire every last one of those freedom-hating government officials who aren't doing their jobs. That's how we hold them accountable.
What is the major difference between the Alberta Prosperity Project and the Free Alberta Strategy? Why not work together?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I know Rob Anderson quite well, and Derek Fromm, who's a constitutional lawyer, as well as Barry Cooper. They're the three people who drafted the Free Alberta Strategy. And I like a lot of what the Free Alberta Strategy has to offer. The thing is where there's an issue, and Rob and I have talked about this, is he wants to implement a Free Alberta Strategy and start off taking control of that which he cannot do within the Constitution, which means he'll create a constitutional crisis. Now, how does a constitutional crisis get adjudicated? You understand, it's the Supreme Court. Now, Supreme Court cases don't take days, weeks, months to resolve. They take years to resolve. And the majority of them are resolved over decades, the really difficult ones. We don't have a time to implement the Free Alberta Strategy in that context. And we have talked about this. So I think there's two problems with the Free Alberta Strategy. One is how a constitutional crisis would be resolved. And number two is how long it takes. And just remember, we're that canoe on the Niagara, and we're going over the falls if we don't stand up and start paddling to shore and do something different. That's really the fundamental difference. Did you have you had something? He says he's got something he wants to add to that too. Go ahead.
The major difference between, the difference between Alberta Prosperity Project and other groups, and the reason why other groups aren't jumping on board with this, in my opinion, is fear. It's fear of having a conversation about independence. Because that whole word, well, independence is, that's the word I use. They call it a separatist movement. Dirty separatists. I'm not a separatist. I don't want to separate myself from the rest of Canada. We can't physically. We're planted right in the middle of Canada. We're not going anywhere. What I am advocating for is that Alberta lead by example to get out from underneath a tyrannical federal government that is going to take away our rights, our freedoms, and our prosperity in the future. And groups, there are some groups out there, I'm not going to name names, but they don't want to have the idea of independence in their literature because of fear. They fear that they can't do enough work to educate, inspire, and inform Albertans as to the merits of independence in a quick enough time. It's all about fear.
What about the media?
Yeah, I'll talk to the media in a second, but just to add something to what Chris had to say here on this particular point, is what we're advocating is absolutely, totally legal. Okay? And it can be done, and we can have our independence within Canada or independence untethered to Canada within 3 years, within 4 years, 3 to 4 years. That can happen. So if you think about what Rob Anderson, the Free Alberta Strategy, is advocating, they want to try and fix Alberta's circumstances in confederation. Negotiating, creating a constitutional crisis, where does that take us? To 2027, 2028, 2029? Who knows? We've tried all these kinds of things for, decades, many decades now, and it hasn't worked. I want you all to understand something. If we save Alberta, i.e. we save Alberta within Canada or we save Alberta untethered to Canada, we will save Canada, period. So, because there's other people in other provinces, they want the same thing. They want the same freedoms and prosperity and self-determination that we want. It's just that they don't know how to get there. They don't know how to do it. And so when Chris says lead by example, that's what we're trying to do, is lead by example. But you're all part of that example. So I hope you're getting on board with us.
So I just got the word. I can ask 3 more questions, but I'm just gonna tell you one thing about the chapters, because Dennis did mention the chapters, and normally after he talks about the chapters, we get a question: what is a chapter? So we only rebranded as the Alberta Prosperity Project on February the 18th, and as Dennis said, we have gotten 119 established chapters. By the end of March, we had 43 by the end of March, and then by the end of May, we're at 119. So we had to divide the province into 7 regions, and we have 7 regional leaders as well. So what's a chapter? A chapter is a group of people, like-minded people, who are willing to go out and about into their community and spread the message about Alberta Prosperity Project. How do you do that? Well, you take home some memberships, you take home some, well, I'm not sure if you can take home memberships, but take home a petition, take home some rack cards, talk to the people in your neighborhood, next door neighbors, etc. Maybe you want to have a coffee and cake party, and then you'll want to invite me to that so I can eat the cake. But basically, we provide you with all of the training and all of the support that you will need to become a chapter leader in your community. So here's our thing. If we were to have 300 chapters, and right now those 119 chapters, the majority of them are in the rural areas. We do have some in Edmonton. We've got one in Sherwood Park, one in St. Albert, and we do have some starting here in Calgary. But if we were to have 300 chapters, and we had 20 strong members in each of those 300 chapters, and each of those 20 strong members went out and recruited 20 more members, we would easily meet our 3.5%. And we would easily make the change that we need to make for Alberta. I feel one of the biggest problems in Canada is the British parliamentary system. It's not democracy. I believe it is possible to change our government to government by consensus, where our members elected work for us instead of some party. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the idea of getting out from under confederation is to create a new form of government, and the parliamentary democracy certainly has failed. And it's failed primarily, you might remember when Churchill said democracy is the worst form of government except for everything else. But what he failed to mention was what kind of democracy we were talking about. And where the rubber meets the road on the failure of democracy is when you have societal rights that trump individual rights. When individual rights are protected, you'll protect societal rights. And the reverse, unfortunately, doesn't occur, and we've seen that as a consequence of Section 1 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which abridged your rights because of the COVID issue, okay? They abridged your individual rights for the purported good of society. So we wouldn't be advocating a parliamentary democracy as an independent nation untethered to Canada, yet we would be advocating as an independent nation to remain a part of the Commonwealth, but as a constitutional republic. So what you need to know is there are 54 Commonwealth nations, 34 are constitutional republics that have no relationship whatsoever to the monarchy or to any form of parliamentary democracy. It's a constitutional republic that has far more checks and balances than a parliamentary democracy.
This one I think is for you, Tanner. How are you engaging the youth?
That's an excellent question. So, very, very good. So, different generations are engaged through different mediums. The fact of the matter is, rightly or wrongly, perhaps neither, not a whole lot of youth will attend events like these, or it's much more difficult to get them to attend events, perhaps if you say there's food. I know when I was in college, if you told me there was free food, well, I'd be there in a heartbeat. But anyways, it's just the nature of the younger generation is to have information instant on their computers, on their phones, etc., and they don't have to step outside their home to discover that information. And so what we're doing is we're engaging with exactly that, these different mediums and these different forms of media in order to engage that younger generation. We're working with marketing groups, global marketing groups, and we have marketers inside our organization that are actively engaged in engaging those younger individuals. Let me give you, at present, the most pressing example, the most actually encouraging example in my opinion. So we have just started a podcast. It's actually my brother and I representing the APP. We've just started it 3 weeks ago, and the response has been phenomenal. The average age, we just had 3 podcasts so far, it comes out every Thursday morning, but the average age of those podcasts, the average age of the listenership of those podcasts has been about 27 to 29, which is fantastic. It's a phenomenal age. But what's most encouraging to me is the numbers, the amount of listeners that we've been receiving. It's been such a blessing. The first podcast, we received 4,000 listens, which is good, it's excellent. The second podcast, we received 6,000 listens, which again is excellent. This third podcast, and I haven't checked since Friday, but this third podcast, as per Friday numbers, they'll be higher now, has already summited 10,000 plus listeners. It's so exciting because these are the mediums that the younger generation uses to gather and obtain information, like what we're proposing. And so we'll continue to do that and expand our operations, as Dennis mentioned, increase this massive educational campaign that we're rolling out in order to engage with as many members of our youth as possible.
Here's something that you can all do. You have young people that you're either kids or grandkids. Ask them if they will give you their phone. And then tell them that they can have it back when they understand that it's only because of the hydrocarbon industry that that phone even exists. There's one way to engage them. I mean, engaging young people is a challenge. There's no question about it. What would you want if you knew what you can have? Great question. And you can have whatever you want if you look after individual rights and you make the right choices and the right decisions. So anyhow.
So the next and the last question says, why are we finding that people within the rural area are more proactive with the Alberta Prosperity Project than the urban centers?
He said fluoride. That's pretty funny. Well, I mean, that is really an excellent question. There is a perception, and perception is reality, of a divide between the rural and urban communities. But where everybody comes together primarily is wanting to protect their individual freedoms, rights, and prosperity and self-determination. Now, there are some people, a much smaller percentage in the rural population and a larger percentage that might be 10 or 20% in the rural population that love big government. They want government to look after everything. They don't want to think about a thing. They don't want to be responsible for anything. That in my opinion, is not the majority of people who even live in the major metropolitan areas. So when we started this off, we recognized that it would be valuable for us to start off in the rural communities to get the message, see how, what the response was from people, and it's been absolutely overwhelming, which we figured that if we did this right, we would then start, and we are starting now, as Shannon mentioned, we were in Sherwood Park recently. So we are moving into the major urban centers with the messaging. But we are also always open to suggestions, and for any of you out here, if you have questions, suggestions, and a gentleman, Wes, and his wife Bonnie gave me a document today with respect to some constitutional issues, which I'm going to look at. We are creating a constitution that we want to bounce off Albertans, and it's going to be drafted with constitutional lawyers as well. It'll be a bit like the US Constitution, but it will be a little bit more robust, because as you've seen what's gone on down in the States, there's, things haven't worked out as well as I think the founding fathers originally intended. So we want to work on some of those particular issues and then roll it out, and we'll roll it out on our website, and then we're going to want people's input on it. But this will be a constitution by Albertans for Albertans. But if we give you a template to look at, then it will give you ideas as well of what can be. Because I think an Alberta Constitution would be absolutely brilliant. And we can learn from constitutions drafted by other countries, including our own Canadian Constitution, which also is not perfect.
I got something.
So it's important to note that this is not just a rural thing. What the Alberta Prosperity Project is proposing,
It's just you, Chris.
it's probably just me. Kerry's got a remote in his pocket, he's messing with me. So this isn't just a rural thing. This is not just for rural. This is beneficial for every single person in Alberta. So if you just consider one of the things that's different between rural and city folks, they're in the city because they generally want somebody else to do something. They want somebody else to take care of the street. They don't want to shovel snow. They don't want to clean a yard or whatever, right? It's and there's nothing wrong with that, or that's where their job is, like Dennis said. But if you consider the things that the people in the cities want, they want good healthcare, they want access to services, they want good infrastructure, they want clean air, the same things that we do. All we have to do is tailor a message towards them, because this really benefits them too. If we have competition in the market for service providers across the province, what do you think is going to happen to the conditions of our streets and our infrastructure? It's going to improve. If you hold governments accountable and you don't allow them to waste resources like they do right now, for every dollar we spend to build something costs them $3. If we bring that down to 1 or maybe even 2, whatever, if we improve and make everything more efficient, all the things that the city folks want all of a sudden are attainable. And right now they're not. Some of them think that the only way they're going to attain it is by electing an NDP government, because they're going to dump a bunch of money in. But what happens in Alberta when you elect an NDP government? They do some good things, I'll give them that. However, they tick off 90% of the province, and all of those things that those folks wanted, the reason why they voted for that government in the first place, they don't get, or it's gone after 4 years, because they caused such a revolt with the rest of the province. So, Alberta Prosperity Project, what they're proposing is a benefit to everybody. And you're correct in identifying that it's important that we start tailoring messages to the city as well, and I'm sure that's going to happen.
Yeah, we have a lot of NDP supporters as well. I mean, isn't that interesting? I mean, they've supported the NDP, but they like what we're doing. So that should tell you something as well. They want the same thing, as Chris pointed out, that you all want: freedom and prosperity. Oh, by the way, by the way, yeah, I know she wants. Yeah, no, the voters, yeah. Splitting the vote. I know that's a concern. So what, I know nobody asked, but I'm going to give you an answer anyhow. So you don't have to worry about splitting the vote. I mean, we grow this, like I say, to 500,000 or 1 million people. There will be no splitting of the vote. You will absolutely control the outcome of the 2023 election. Go ahead.
What's your current membership?
Go ahead.
We're just over 5,000. We're probably at 5,200, I believe. And that's only since the 18th of February.
Yeah.
Give it to me.
But there's over 250,000 people following us.
Remember at the beginning, I mentioned Thomas Jefferson said, whenever you do a thing, act as if the world is watching. The world is watching us right now. And I can tell you that the names of these gentlemen are not only household names in Alberta, but they're household neighbors in the entire world. I have 2 friends in Australia and actually got a Facebook message the other day. Hey Shannon, do you know Chris Scott? Well, yes, actually I do. They haven't asked about Tanner and Dennis yet, but that's coming. The Alberta Prosperity Project is about planting the seeds of hope. We have seen both provincial and federal governments do their best to divide and conquer us, making us feel alone. It is our hope that you realize today, after the presentations from these gentlemen, that you are not alone. Alone, we can only do so little, but united together, we can do so much more. We cannot heal in isolation, but we can in community. The Alberta Prosperity Project wants to help you rebuild your community. There's no power for change greater than a community that is discovering what it cares for. No greater sense of purpose than growing fellowship, building community, and forging unity. Come join the movement to create a fabulous tomorrow with the free and prosperous nation of Alberta. We've got one chance to secure a future for our children and our grandchildren. One chance, and that is by electing an independent-minded government in 2023. We need to show our friends and our neighbors that there is hope. We need you to be the change that you want to see in the world, to talk to your friends and your neighbors and encourage them to attend an Alberta Prosperity Project event themselves. Turn that "you'll never do this" into "this is 100% doable." We have a vision for Community of Alberta. We're building a community within ourselves, and we want all of you to join us. Our message is strong. Our community is growing. And our solution, with no politicians at our table, is to, as Dennis says, unite 500,000 to 1 million to 1.5 million or more Albertans to stand together. And that's something that's never been done before. We're creating history right now. I encourage you all to be on the right side of that history.
And Saskatchewan is starting a Saskatchewan Prosperity Project.
And so is BC, yes. What we're trying to do here is restore our communities to owe our ultimate allegiance, not to any government ever again, but to our fellow man. Alberta will become an independent, sovereign, constitutional republic, one where the First Nations people sit at the table as partners in the creation of a new nation of Alberta. And on that great day, Alberta truly will become united, strong, and free. We thank you for coming today.